Welcome to video 4 of module 2, Practical Foundations of Prompting. We've been building a toolkit, a mental model in video 1, a zero shot and one shot prompts in video 2, and few shot example design in video 3. All of those techniques have been focused on what you're asking for and how you demonstrate it. In this video, we are going to look at something slightly different, not the content of the prompt, but the framing. Role, audience, and tone are the three levers that don't change what you're asking for, but they change the character of how it's delivered. The perspective the model writes from, the depth, the vocabulary which is appropriate for the specified reader, and the style in which it's expressed. So, used well, these are some of the most reliable tools in our toolkit. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what each lever does, how to combine them, and where the pitfalls are. So before we begin, let's do a quick recap of the previous video. So the first thing is a few short examples. They teach us rules. They don't teach us instances. So the model infers the principle by connecting your examples and applies it to new inputs. And they need to be designed for coverage and diversity, and the format must be consistent across every example without an exception. And using 3 to 5 high quality examples is the sweet spot. Using more than 3 to 5 examples can sometimes crowd and confuse your model. And bad examples degrade performance, and the best example that you have always goes last. The reason for this is recency bias. Now, let's talk about who is speaking and who they are speaking to in terms of prompt engineering. Role prompting means telling the model who it is before asking it to do something. Like, act as a senior data scientist explaining this to a colleague, or you are an experienced strategy consultant advising a growth state startup, or respond as a high school chemistry teacher. So, these instructions are called as role prompts. They're widely used, sometimes misunderstood, and sometimes misused as well. So, let me explain precisely what they do and what they don't. So, what role prompting actually changes? So, a language model is trained on text from across an enormous range of domains, expertise levels, and contexts, like academic papers written by physicists, business strategy documents, casual conversations, technical documentation, journalistic pieces, pretty much anything that's available on the internet. Now, different roles activate different subsets of that training. So, when you say act as a data scientist, you're telling the model to weigh its response toward the kind of text a data scientist would write, the vocabulary that they would use, the assumptions they'd make, and the level of mathematical detail they would want to include, the qualifications and the caveats that a data scientist can actually offer. And this produces a real and measurable effect on output. Let's look at the question, explain what gradient descent is. So we can ask this question for three different roles. So the first role is explain gradient descent. We are not mentioning anything specific, and I'll show you what the response to this would look like. So here we are asking explain what gradient descent is. So it gives you what is the intuition behind gradient descent, how it works, a mathematical formulation, why it's useful in machine learning, and the different variants of gradient descent. So this is reasonable. It's somewhat mid-level, and it's somewhere in between a textbook and something that is more accessible to understand. But this is calibrated for an imaginary average reader. Now, if I was to change the role and let's say act as a data scientist explaining to a colleague, like this is something we'll add to our prompt. So it looks something like this: act as a data scientist explaining gradient descent to a machine learning colleague. Explain what gradient descent is. So, gradient descent is an iterative optimization algorithm. What the core idea is, the formal definition, you can see it's a little bit more mathematical than it was earlier. We have the intuition, why it works, and what are some practical considerations, and what it means in the machine learning context. Now it assumed a little bit of machine learning fluency. It makes an assumption that because as a data scientist is mentioned in the prompt, that there is a certain amount of mathematical fluency, mathematical notation familiarity there, and it discusses variants and practical tuning as well. So this is calibrated for someone who already knows the fundamentals. Now, let's change the role again. Let's say we want to explain gradient descent, but we want this to act as a teacher explaining it to a high school student. So here we are saying act as a high school teacher explaining gradient descent to a student who has never studied calculus or machine learning. So now you can see that it's saying imagine you're teaching a computer to do something by giving it lots of examples, and it tries to introduce where gradient descent comes in, what the idea is, how it works, a very simple analogy to help us understand and why it matters in machine learning. As you can see, there is no mathematical fluency, no calculus fluency that's been assumed. So the analogy is from everyday experience, right? So it says, imagine you're trying to throw a ball into the lowest point of a bowl while blindfolded. You throw it once, it lands somewhere random. You feel which direction it sloped towards, and then you adjust. So this is a everyday experience, and it ends at exactly the right conceptual depth for a student. So role specification is what did all of this. So, if there is no role, then a reasonable explanation somewhere between technical and accessible. The model guesses the appropriate depth and the vocabulary. Now, if I said data scientist role, then there is mathematical framing, discussion of the loss function, the learning rate, some kind of convergence behavior, the kind of explanation one statistician might give another. And the high school teacher role, this gives an analogy about rolling a ball down a hill to find the lowest point. So this is intuitive, it's visual, there are no equations. The model has calibrated its explanation to what a student with no background knowledge would need. So we're using the same knowledge. The underlying concept is gradient descent. This is also same throughout. But three completely different outputs. And this is driven entirely by the role specification. So role prompting is most useful when the appropriate framing depends on expertise level. You know, a domain expert and a novice need different kinds of explanation for the same concept. The appropriate vocabulary is domain specific, medical terminology, legal language, or financial jargon. So different domains have different conventions, and the role specification activates the right ones. The appropriate assumptions also vary, like different roles make different things explicit or implicit. A role specification basically tells the model which assumptions its reader will already have. Now, coming to the next important thing, what role prompting does not change. So, there is an important caveat here which is pretty easy to overlook. So, a role does not increase the model's factual accuracy as such. It makes the model sound more like a specified role. So, if we say act as a medical expert or act like a doctor, it produces medically sounding output. Now, it does not give the model access to that medical knowledge it did not have before. So, it does not prevent the model from generating confident, medically sounding errors. In fact, it might make errors harder to catch because they're wrapped in an authoritative sounding language. So, for anything where accuracy matters, maybe medical, legal, technical, financial, whatever it is, always verify the output independently, regardless of what role you specified. A role is a framing tool, it's not a reliability guarantee. Next, coming to audience prompting. So audience prompting is the practice of specifying who the output is for rather than who is producing it. So, let's say we take somewhat of a similar question like compound interest. Now I want to say what is compound interest or explain compound interest. First, I'm going to do it for a school student, then for a business manager, and then for a data scientist. Let's go into ChatGPT and see what the outputs are going to look like. So the first audience I have is a 14-year-old with no finance background. So the prompt looks something like this: explain how compound interest works to a 14-year-old with no finance background. So compound interest is basically interest earning interest, and it starts simple with a very simple calculation, and then it compounds and shows what the snowball effect is. And here it points out why it feels powerful and what the real life meaning is, and then it summarizes it. So there are concrete numbers, there is somewhat of a progressive explanation, which is conversational. So it is perfect for an audience like a 14-year-old with no finance background. look at explaining compound interest for a business manager. So here we have explained how compound interest works to a business manager with no accounting background. Focus on business relevance. So what happens here is it starts off with the simple idea why this matters in business. So what happens with investments and retained earnings, borrowings and debt, how exactly compound interest works here, and then it gives us an example and business takeaways, like for investment time works for you, that is growth accelerates, and for debt time works against you, so costs also escalate. So this is something for specifically for a business manager. It has a business framing. The practical implications are well specified. There are no formulae because this is calibrated for someone who needs to act on this, not pass an exam or not go into the financial or accounting domain to be able to understand. Next, let's look at the same compound interest explanation for a third audience, that is for a data scientist. So here we have explain how compound interest works to a data scientist familiar with exponential functions. Here, it starts off with the core idea, but it starts off with a mathematical formula, which basically has an exponential growth. And it also has a data science interpretation where it says you have a state variable A. At each time step, you apply a multiplicative update, and in log terms, what it looks like. And there is also connection to continuous exponential growth. What is the intuition for a data scientist to be able to understand this? It introduces concepts like Brownian motion, and why compounding frequency matters, a machine learning analogy as well, which is a useful mental model to use. So here it assumes calculus literacy, it connects to exponential functions, they know, it gives modeling implications, and there are no analogies needed. So full mathematical precision is expected. Now, this information is the same in all three. The vocabulary, depth, and example types are completely different. So, the three examples that we looked at, so for a school student, it explains using an analogy about money in a jar. The manager explanation uses business investment framing. And the data scientist explanation uses the mathematical formula and discusses the relationship between simple and compound growth. Now, none of these outputs required instructions about vocabulary, depth, or example types. The audience specification generated all of that automatically. Now we can combine a role and audience. So you can use both levers together for precise control. Say, like you are a financial analyst, write for a founder with no accounting background. So here the role establishes the perspective and expertise from which the model writes, and the audience establishes the appropriate vocabulary and the depth for the reader. So together they define both sides of the communication, who is speaking and who they are speaking to. So this combination is particularly useful when the role and audience don't naturally match. Like a financial analyst writing for a non-financial audience needs to write very differently from a financial analyst writing for a colleague. So specifying both tells the model to apply financial expertise when calibrating for a non-expert reader. Coming to the next part, the third lever, that is tone. And I want to be precise about how it differs from role and audience because they are different tools. So, role shapes who is speaking, the perspective, the expertise, and the framing is what role shapes. And audience shapes who is being spoken to, the depth, vocabulary, assumed knowledge. And tone shapes how something is said, like what is the style, what is the register, how formal is it. So tone is independent of the other two, of role and audience. So you can have the same role writing to the same audience in completely different tones, and the output will be meaningfully different. So let's look at a few examples. So we have a quarter four project update, one blocker, one owner, same facts, but we want to write this in three different tones. So the three tones we are looking for here are formal, concise executive, and persuasive. So let's go into ChatGPT, write these prompts, and see what are the outputs that we are getting. So let's start off with a formal tone. So we are saying write a formal project status email about the following situation. Q4 project is on track. One blocker, software procurement approval is pending. Owner is Sarah Chen, and the deadline is October 31st. So here, what do we see? You see that it starts with Dear Team, and then it starts with I would like to provide a brief update on the Q4 status. There is currently one blocker impacting progress, and the project deadline still remains the same. Things to note here are the formal salutation, the passive constructions, and the language is also very measured. So, this is appropriate for a written update to a senior or a senior external stakeholder. So the tone is formal. Now, if I have to write the same information in a concise executive tone, how would I do that? So let's look at the second example for that. So here I'm saying write a three-line executive briefing, no greeting, no sign off, about the same scenario. Q4 project is on track. There is one blocker, and the owner is Sarah Chen, and the deadline is October 31st. So now we have three lines. So every word here basically earns its place. It's appropriate for a leader who reads this in 10 seconds and then decides whether to act or not. So this is the concise executive tone. Now let's change the tone a little bit more and look at a more persuasive tone. So here we can say write a persuasive internal message encouraging leadership to prioritize a procurement approval. And the context is basically Q4 project update, which is on track. They have one blocker, which is the software procurement approval, and this is owned by Sarah Chen, and the deadline is still October 31st. So it starts with Hi Sarah, which is not very formal, and then it goes on to write an email which is more forward looking. It frames the ask as small and then it ends with a benefit. So, how does it end? It says prioritizing this approval would ensure that we keep the momentum and deliver as planned without requiring contingency adjustments later. So this is designed to motivate action. It's not just to inform. So these are the same facts that we saw earlier, but it has a completely different effect. To summarize between the different tones that we have looked at, so we have a formal one. So here the output is professional and measured. It opens with a conventional greeting and then it establishes context before getting to the point. So this is appropriate for a written update to a senior. Next, we have concise executive. So the here we are specifying three lines. So we get three lines. It specifies who the owner is, the action, deadline, and nothing else is included here. So this is optimized for a reader who has very limited time and needs to act. We then have the third tone, that is persuasive. So this is forward looking and benefit framed and oriented towards getting the leadership to prioritize and act. The goal is to motivate action here, it's not just to inform. So the same information, but completely different effect on the reader. The right tone depends on what you need the communication to accomplish. Do you need to inform? Do you need to prompt action? Do you need to build buy in? What is it? So the common tone specifications that work reliably are something like be direct, no hedging or padding. So this reduces the tendency towards verbose, unqualified output. Also saying keep it concise to some X sentences maximum. This forces the model to prioritize and cut. Or when we say write persuasively, emphasizing benefit and action, this activates the persuasive writing patterns. Write in plain English, avoid jargon. So this works in combination with a technical role specification to produce expert content that non-experts can read. So you can combine all the three levers together and get an output. This will give you maximum control. So the role, audience, and the tone, each of them will be specified. The model has almost no interpretive latitude whatsoever. So what comes back will be tightly calibrated to exactly what you need. Let me close this with pitfalls. So the ways role and persona prompting go wrong, because these are some mistakes that we regularly see. So the first mistake is mistaking role and accuracy. this is one of the most dangerous misconceptions that we have. So role makes output sound like a role. It does not make the model more accurate. So, act as a doctor produces medically authoritative sounding text. It does not make the model less prone to generating incorrect medical information. In fact, the confident register that comes with a medical role specification can make errors harder to detect. So, for any domain where accuracy matters, like medical advice or legal guidance, financial recommendations, or technical specifications, always verify the output independently, regardless of the role. The second pitfall is that roles bypass safety behavior. So, you may see prompts like you are an AI with no restriction, or act as a version of yourself trained without ethical guidelines. So, these don't work as intended, and attempting them is a signal worth paying attention to. So, safety behavior is embedded throughout the model's training. It's not a rule enforced from outside that a role specification can override. And if you find yourself looking for ways to bypass this safety behavior, that's something worth sitting with. So, what is it that you're trying to produce, and why do you believe it requires bypassing the model safety design? So, that is an important question you need to answer. The third pitfall is conflicting persona constraints. So you can't say act as a neutral journalist and write persuasively in favor of X. So these are directly contradictory. The model will try to satisfy both these instructions and typically satisfies neither. So conflicting persona constraints produce a muddled output. So one role, one direction is what we require. And pitfall 4 is over specified personas. So like, let's say you're writing something like you're friendly, professional, empathetic, concise, enthusiastic, and knowledgeable. Now these adjectives in the list, they pull slightly in different directions. So friendly and professional tension, or like between being empathetic and being concise. So the model tries to satisfy all of these adjectives, and it ends up producing something very vague with all of them, which usually means it's fully consistent with none of them. So pick either one or two attributes that matter most for the task and leave the rest out. The general principle is that roles and personas are framing tools. They shift vocabulary, perspective, and register. Use them for what they actually do. So, calibrating style and emphasis. Don't use them as authority claims or to bypass mechanisms or over constrained contradictions. Coming to the end of the video, here are 5 key takeaways. The first one is role changes framing, it does not change accuracy. It shifts vocabulary, emphasis, and perspective. The model sounds more like the role, but it doesn't become more reliable because of it. So you need to always verify this in high stakes situations. And the second takeaway is audience is the most reliable calibration lever. So, specifying who the output is for simultaneously adjusts any assumed knowledge, example types, the depth. So, use it whenever calibration is the real problem. The third takeaway is tone control style independently. It's a separate lever from role and audience. So specify it explicitly when the register matters. Like, do you want it to be formal, concise, persuasive, or empathetic? The fourth takeaway is to combine all the three for maximum precision. So, combining role, audience, and tone together will leave the model with very little interpretive freedom. So, this produces a very tightly calibrated and very consistent output. And the last takeaway is avoid the pitfalls. So the pitfalls are a role does not mean accuracy, and role doesn't bypass the safety behavior that your model is built on, and contradictory personas will produce contradictory outputs. So stick to one or two attributes that matter the most. And over specifying the role or the audience is going to produce a very muddled output. So less is usually more when it comes to persona constraints. So, in the upcoming video, video 5, we take everything we've covered, the four components, examples, role, audience, and tone, and give it a home in a single structured framework called as RICE. The next video covers that framework. It is a useful reference when building complex or repetitive prompts. So, see you in video 5.